And habits don't form in 21 days. They don't form in one day. They form in cycles of 63 to 66 days.
Are you overwhelmed by motherhood and barely keeping your head above water? Are you confused and frustrated by how all the other moms make it look so easy? You can't figure out how to manage the chaos in your mind, your home, or your family. I get you, mama. Parenting with ADHD is hard. Here is your permission slip to let go of the Pinterest-worthy visions of organization and structure fit for everyone else. Let's do life like our brains do life. Creatively, lovingly, and with all our might. When we embrace who we are and how our brains work, we can figure out how to live our lives successfully and, in turn, lead our families well. At the end of the day, we just want to be good moms. But, spoiler alert, you are already a great mom. ADHD does not mean you're doomed to be a hot mess, mama. You can rewrite your story from shame spiral to success story. And I'll be right here beside you to cheer you on. Welcome to Motherhood in ADHD. Hey there, successful mama. It's your friend Patricia Sung. Today we are interviewing Dr. Caroline Leaf. Dr. Leaf is a communication pathologist, audiologist, and clinical and cognitive neuroscientist who specializes in psychoneurobiology and metacognitive neuropsychology. Her passion is to help people see the power of the mind to change the brain, control chaotic thinking, and find mental peace. Now, Dr. Leaf has written like a bazillion books. She's been around for decades. This woman knows her stuff. Dr. Leaf is a full-fledged supporter that ADHD is not a disorder. It is a collection of traits that show how we do things differently. We show different behaviors. We feel big. We have big emotions. That doesn't make us broken. This is an extremely powerful and encouraging, although very scientific-y discussion about it boils down to the fact that we have control over our brains. We have the power to change the way that we think and the way that we function. Everything she's talking about here just made my little coaching heart sing, because this is the way that I coach, is helping you see that you have control over the way that you function. You are not stuck in the place that you are, and you can rewrite the way that you react things. You can build new habits. You can change the way that you talk to your family and the way that you feel when things go wrong. Like, your mind is a malleable place, and you are able to create different ways of doing things, and you're not stuck there. You're not broken. When you have ADHD, you're not accepting a life sentence of misery and pain. You can create healing. It is fully possible to be successful with ADHD when you have tools like Dr. Leaf is going to explain to us today in understanding how we rewrite our brains. We dive into what is the difference between your brain and your mind? How do we rewrite the way that we think about things and the way that we react? She dispels that myth that habits are built in 21 days. If anybody knows this woman who has studied brains for 4 decades, know how they work. And we dive into how do you work together with your feelings and your emotions and your behaviors and your perspectives in order to create lasting change, not just for you, but for your kids as well. You can build a life that is different, that makes you happy, and that you love being in every day. And we're going to start today by building that toolbox for you with the tools that Dr. Leaf is sharing with us. So let's dive into the interview. All right, let's welcome Dr. Caroline Leaf to the show. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing so well. How are you doing?
I'm hanging in. It's summer and I have small kids. So
That's the challenge.
Always. And your kids are already older and grown up, right?
They are, but once a mother, always a mother. So I have 4 adult children, and all 4 of them actually work for me. 3 full-time and 1 part-time. So you're always mothering. You're still always, and I'm about to be a grandmother for the first time in 3 weeks' time. So I'm very excited about that. So, thank you. Yeah. But I know what it looks like being a mother with children, 4 young children, very close in age, and to keep them busy. This in South Africa where my kids grew up, they don't have such a long summer holiday. It's 4 holidays spread across the year. And I honestly think for mothers, that's a godsend, because you have little breaks as opposed to this one huge time frame that you have to keep your children entertained. I think it's very, very hard for moms. So my hat goes off to you with the long summers.
Yes, I always think about that year-round school, like, oh, that sounds so much better to have.
It's great. It's really great. The kids are enthusiastic, then they need a break, you have a break. They're excited to go back to school, you have a break. It's such a good design. And I've heard there's talk about changing that in the States. So whether it's just talk or whether it will just happen, whether it will happen is questionable. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely areas that use it, but ooh, that would be lovely. Okay, well, anyways, when I think about all of the titles that you have, between being a neuroscientist, it's a long list. Is this what 10-year-old Caroline thought she'd be doing?
I was always fascinated from very young with the brain and the mind. And I was going to be a neurosurgeon. I actually got into medicine, did part medicine, and I just decided that mind was neurosurgery is one thing, but I wanted to actually connect with, understand more about the mind. I'm a scientist as well. So the 10-year-old in me was already very, very interested in this field, already trying to understand these things and whatever. So I sound like such a nerd, but I was. And was very focused from very young on what I wanted to do. So it's been a life mission. I mean, I'm now 38 years in the field, almost 40 years of research and 25 years clinical practice. So it's a long time on. So, and I still love it and still very enthusiastic.
So as you were going through all of these steps along the way, at what point did you realize like this is so much more than just what people have been saying? Because it's like when you look at the way that you approach the brain, it's not just what everybody's been doing all this time. You keep innovating, you keep looking at it in new ways. Like, was there like a pivotal moment where you said, wow, this is so much more than I even imagined it to be?
I love your question, Patricia. There were a few moments like that. And I have a very interesting trajectory because I've watched the field over 40 years and I've seen what happened. And there was a definite shift from the 80s to now in how people look at people that are battling with any level of communication. So back in the 80s, what was really great about that time period was the understanding that the mind and the brain were separate. What was bad about that stage was that they didn't think the brain could change. And that was one of my first kind of epiphanies or pivotal moments in my career was when I was sitting in a neuroscience lecture and the lecturer actually said, the brain can't change. And I remember putting up my hand after this whole long lecture and saying, but, Professor, we as humans are changing. So if we are changing and our mind is using our brain must be changing. And he actually quite sort of snarkily said to me, oh, well, go do research on it. So as a young student, that's exactly what I did. So I said, well, what area should I work in? And, just what guidance, he said, well, why don't you go and study traumatic brain injury? It used to be called closed head injury because there's very little research on it. Now, he was kind of being sarcastic by saying, why bother? The brain, once it's damaged, there's no good. So, but I didn't see it that way. And I said, okay. And I started doing research in traumatic brain injury. And pretty much it shifted the field because my work was some of the earliest work in the field on neuroplasticity, showing the mind changes the brain, that the brain can always change and we can be empowered, that we're not stuck with a brain in one state. Your brain is constantly growing and changing, and you can actually direct the change, which is probably the most exciting thing that I've ever, that really kept me going, was the fact that we as humans can direct the changes in our brain. Our brain doesn't control us, we actually control the brain. So that sparked off a whole lot of research. And at that time, the field also was very good in distinguishing between neurological issues and life trauma, sort of the experiences of life. So we would have mental health challenges from the experiences of life, and we would distinguish between neurological issues, so someone who had a traumatic brain injury or a brain tumor or something like that, where there was Parkinson's, dementia, that kind of thing, where we know that there is evidence of neurological issues. Then I watched in the 40 years of the field changing, and they became blended into one field. And also around about 40, it's actually about 50 years ago, but it really came to prominence about 40 years ago. The field shifted from seeing a person in the entirety and in the context of their life and the environment, and looking at when people battle, looking at the whole big picture and looking at the whole context of their lives. That shifted because that takes time. We didn't diagnose in 15 minutes. We spent 7 to 9 sessions, and even then it was a prognosis versus, it was more of we think this is what's happening and we'll watch, and more of a prognostic approach versus diagnostic approach. And that shifted because that takes time. That's, and it's the correct way of doing it, but it shifted to this current model, which is very biomedical, which is just quick labels, linked back to diagnoses, a blending of, life experiences with actual physical damage to the brain and that kind of stuff. And that was a worry. And I remember also another lecture of ours telling us all those years ago that the whole labeling and diagnosis, the way it's going, is going to create a huge problem in the future. And we're sitting now with the worst mental health situation we ever sat with. We're sitting with people that are dying 8 to 25 years younger than they should. We're sitting with crises that you can track back to that time period when our philosophy shifted. So my goal has been to really look at the psychoneurobiological process of humanity. What are thoughts? What are emotions? How do they build in your brain? What is the mind? What is the brain? And how can we actually empower ourselves and our children to be able to manage life and manage the issues of life and make the distinction that we need to do between a traumatic brain injury, for example, and a life experience, and the combination of the blending of you can have a combination of both. So that's sort of a big walk through the big picture.
And can you tell me a little bit more, like, what is the difference between your brain and your mind, so that we can understand, where do we start?
Good question. And most people that are, as I said, back in the 80s, there was a clear distinction. So you definitely are a lot younger than what I'm nearly 60. And I assume you're probably in your mid-30s, something like that.
Why, thank you, but no.
In your 40s, okay. So you're still younger than I am. So
yes,
you probably not over, much over 40. So you've been in that time frame where your entire life and your training as a teacher, I've trained thousands of teachers as well, has been immersed in one where the mind and the brain have kind of been seen as the same thing. And so like in the mid-90s, when the fMRI machine technology was discovered, we could see inside the brain and we could see the brain responding and that kind of stuff. And that's when neuroplasticity really became something. My work was in the late 80s, early 90s. So essentially, just to how this I'm just trying to think of the most simple way of answering this question. Let's be more specific. Just rephrase your question. I just want to make sure that I don't get, because there's so many ways I can answer this question. Let's hone in on exactly what you'd like me to talk about, because I can talk about from so many different angles.
When you look at specifically what's the difference between the two, because I think so many people think they're the exact same thing, how do we differentiate? What exactly are we doing between these two things? Because then we know how to go in and actually make some change.
Absolutely.
But if we think they're the exact same thing, then I think it's a lot harder to
exactly. Very good. Okay. So as I said, most people for the last 40 years have been told they're the same thing, but they actually aren't. So the easiest way to understand this is to think that you and I are able to have this conversation. You've got listeners in a couple of years but mainly listeners that are sitting and processing this conversation. Now, I'm sure we can all agree, if we were dead, we couldn't do that. We wouldn't be doing anything. But right now, as you are listening to me and I'm listening to you and the listeners are listening to us, we have this intense communication and conversation going on, which can be seen as two different things: a whole psychological think, feel, choose conversation in response to each other. And there's also a physical component of electromagnetic light fields, electromagnetics, auditory sound waves, all kinds of things happening as well. And that combination is basically changing physical structures inside of the brain. So the mind is all this aliveness, all this psychological think, feel, choose, ability to respond, ability to parent, to have a conversation, to talk about the things you talk about, to just be alive. And being alive, we respond. And in that response, we are living inside a brain, and we have a brain and a body. So our mind is actually separate from the brain and the body, but it works through the brain and the body. So if you think of it in a very, very simple analogy, a light switch can't switch itself on. We actually have to switch the light switch on. That's kind of how you could also look at this. The mind is this ability that we have to switch the brain on. We switch the light on, we switch the brain on. If you were dead, your brain would be doing absolutely nothing now. It would be disintegrating. But you're alive, you're responding, and because you're responding psychologically and on this physical level, which is all this classic and quantum physics and so on, your brain is changing every moment. In fact, you are making somewhere between 800,000 and 1 million new cells every second that we're talking. That is phenomenal. Your heart is pumping because of your mind. Your brain is responding because of your mind. Your body, your lungs are helping you breathe because of your mind. If you're dead, that's not happening. So mind is your aliveness, your ability to experience, to think, feel, and choose, and then to create a physical response in the brain and the body. And then the brain and the body respond to the mind. So it's kind of like if I have a messy mind that's unmanaged, I'm going to have a messy brain and a messy body and a messy life. So if we can look at then managing our mind and what that looks like, we can then help to change the structure network of our brain and the functioning of our brain and our body, which then can impact how we show up in life. And that's an ongoing process that happens pretty much all day long. And then at night as well, but it happens slightly differently at night.
Part of me is like, ooh, I want to hear about that, but also stay on track, Patricia. Okay, I have a whole list of questions here, and I'm something you said I have to jump out at. When you have ADHD, we're really good with visual analogies and being able to picture it somehow, whether it's in, a metaphor or what have you. That really helps people with ADHD picture like the end result. When you say having a clean mind and the whole concept of like cleaning up your mental mess, how do we translate that into real life where we actually put that into practice?
Okay, excellent question. So every human, regardless of whatever label, we are messy. We are like little scientists. Every moment of every day is a new experience. Even though we can predict the familiarity to a certain extent, we still can't 100% predict anything. We also don't know what's happening when we walk out the front door, what's going to happen with the politics, etc. So it's kind of messy. So we also have things affecting us. So everything's a little experimental, a little bit hypothetical. And that messiness is very, very normal. It's very much part of how we function as a human. What can happen though is we can fall into messy patterns, which is certain ways of responding that we can get stuck in. And those don't always, initially could be a coping mechanism. Like, so for example, if a child's being abused or something, or if there's an adult, or there's a situation that's, you just have to survive, and we create coping mechanisms that help us survive in the moment, but in the long term, they're not very good. Now, those responses are our mind coping with our experiences, and they get wired into the brain and into the body and into the mind. So everything that we experience, like this conversation, is going into three places: the mind as a gravitational field, into the brain as a network that looks like a tree, literally, with roots and branches, and its roots and tree trunk and branches, and then into the body as a change in the cells, in the DNA, in the epigenome, which is basically around the gene, and then also in the structure, this what we call the cytoskeleton of the cells. So it's quite complex, but on a simple level, just think of it like this. Every experience that you have as a human, forget labels, forget anything else, as a human, you are processing at an incredibly fast speed every experience you have through your mind. Your mind is this liveness processing thing on the psychological and physical level into the brain, and you are changing the brain and the body. And this psychoneurobiological link, mind, brain, body link, is then combined, and magically we show up in our uniqueness as a person and how in each situation. And so this is constantly going on, this experience coming in, our existing experiences play into that, and the unique way that we see the world plays into that. So all of these factors mix together, and we basically show up. So in the ideal world where nothing is going wrong, which doesn't happen because life is filled with challenges, we are doing this kind of messy thing, and we're showing up in a way that is, right reactions and positive, and it's, the normal sort of sadness and normal kind of anxieties, which is, there is anxiety and depression, these things, there's a normal level, and there's a level where it can kind of get out of balance. But that's not life, because life, we get bullied at school, we battle with this, we battle with that, these things, life. Okay, so that means that our experiences don't always come in this perfect way, and therefore our mind is often dealing with erratic, different kinds of toxic experiences on different levels. So if you think of a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being your day-to-day stuff that are not huge, maybe a little fight with a sibling, but it's not a major issue, to the big stuff where you're being consistently abused or bullied or something like that. So, and then there's all the in between. So most of us live around the 1, 2, 3 range, and then every 5 years we'll have a big thing, more or less, according to statistics. But hopefully most of us don't have many of the things in the 8, 9, 10 range, but there are a percentage of the population that have extreme challenges. So that's experiences, okay? So now all of this is being processed by the mind into the brain. Now the brain in itself is constantly changing. So I personally, from the research I've done, don't agree with the research that we have a brain that is neurodiverse. I believe what happens is that our brain I've been in this field for years, the brain can be changed. So if we have multiple experiences, the brain will change. It will be negatively affected, because the brain is simply if you have constant things thrown at you, it goes through the brain. It's like taking your computer and throwing it on the floor, not using something proper. Your brain will, although your brain's way more intelligent than a computer, way more. But it's the same thing. It's still a physical structure. So the messy experience comes into the brain differently to a healthy experience. Like a great conversation is going to go into the brain differently to something where there's a yelling fight or something like that. And the yelling fight will actually wire a response into the networks of the brain that looks different, where the proteins fold differently, the energy fields are different, the genetics look different. So it looks different. And over time, if that's consistent, that messiness is wired in as a physical structure that looks like a tree as well, but it's all wiry and ugly. And if anyone have ever seen any of my imagery and things, I use a healthy green tree and a wiry looking tree just to understand the concept of a thought. So an experience gets wired in as a thought. And over time, if we don't manage that thought, if it becomes chronic, so ongoing, and if it's a consistent pattern or if it's an undealt with issue, that does change the brain. And when the brain changes, everything else changes because the brain directs things. So we'll have our hormones changing, we'll have our neurochemicals changing, we'll have our heart changing, and that it increases our vulnerability to all kinds of manifestations on a physical and mental level, including things like concentration and all that kind of stuff. Now, when it comes to something like a messy experience, because it's normal to have messiness, because part of being a human is you will experience messiness, what our mind-brain-body connection is designed for is to handle messiness. We're pretty good at actually handling messiness, but it's when things get out of control that we then can get stuck, and we can get stuck in patterns of messiness. So then your brain's immune system actually responds to the consistent network that's now this wiry tree that's now not healthy anymore. It responds by seeing that as an invasion. So we get a physical response to a psychological problem or a psychological experience that has become physical, because everything that we experience becomes physical. Okay, it goes through this mind processing to become this physical vibrational fields in the mind and all these changes in the brain and the proteins and all that stuff. So if it's messy, then it's a messy looking tree. If it's consistent, that then creates an immune response, exactly the same way as the COVID virus or any virus will stimulate an immune response. A psychological issue does the same thing. So we have an immune response, and the brain and body are now recognizing this invasion of this toxic experience, and it tries to fix it. And so it'll send out immune factors. But if we don't deal with the source issue, then the inflammation increases and the brain becomes hyper responsive, and the body can become hyper responsive, and your vulnerability to all kinds of medical and mental issues can increase. Okay, so that's kind of what I mean by the messy mind. So as humans, we need to give ourselves tools, and you can teach this to children as young as 2. Some of my patients in my practice were as young as 2. This latest book that I've just written, How to Help Your Child Clean Up Their Mental Mess, is to help parents help their children from the ages of 2. This book particularly 2 through 10, because my other books you can use with older children and adults, obviously. So you can teach a child, you can give a child as young as 2 the tools to be able to recognize the signals of messiness, and there are specific signals, and we can go into that. It's not that difficult to understand, and I make it super easy in the book with imagery, and we have a little character called Brainy, who's this like we call him the superhero, your mental health superhero, and he walks the mental health journey. So the book is filled, How to Help a Child Clean Up Your Mental Mess, is filled with this image of Brainy. We also have a coloring book and that kind of thing. So a child as young as 2 can point to the pictures and the images and all the steps and the processes and the ways that you can manage your mind, teach a child to manage your mind. You can do all through this imagery. And then I've got obviously the different age groups, what to say at what age group and so on. Point being is that messiness is normal. Messy parenting is normal. You talk a lot about that concept as well on your podcast. That is so normal. What we've got to do is realize, though, that in recognizing messiness as normal, we've also got to recognize we have to manage the mess. So eventually at some point we have to recognize when the messiness is tipping the scales to the point where now, instead of that depression, anxiety, frustration being at a level where it's balanced, where you can restore the scale and you can keep moving forward, it starts tipping and overwhelm and burnout. Then depression and anxiety, which are not illnesses, they are basically signals telling you that something's going on in your life. When the scale tips, that's when we can feel completely drawn into states of mental challenges where we feel all kinds of extreme levels of depression and anxiety. It still doesn't make them a physical disease. They're not mental illnesses. They are signals that something's going on. So mind management involves us being able to stand back and evaluate this tipping point. How am I showing up? Where am I starting to tip? What is the process of how can I recognize those signals, and what is it coming from? And how can I deconstruct and reconstruct and reconceptualize the situation? Because what brain science shows, neuroscience, psychoneurobiology shows, is that as humans, we have this phenomenal ability within our messiness to stand back into our wise mind. Every human has a wise mind, even that 2-year-old. Children are so much, as you know yourself, you speak about this too. Children are so insightful. And as a teacher, former teacher, you would have experienced how insightful kids actually are as well, and how we can sometimes misunderstand the amount that they do understand. They're not as verbal, so they can't, their understanding is much more advanced than the ability to express themselves. So this is where we play a massive role as adults. So the messiness aspect comes in our ability to be able to stand back, observe how we're functioning, and then to say, okay, that's not who I am. I'm functioning like this because of something in my life, because of something that's going on. Maybe there is a TBI, maybe there is a TBI being traumatic brain injury, maybe there is some kind of medicine that you're taking that's affecting how you're functioning. Maybe there was some birth trauma, maybe there was, something that caused some sort of a learning disability, which has the symptoms of things like the ADHD and so on. Because I see ADHD not as a disease, but as a description. When you look from a brain science perspective, it's describing a set of very, very real symptoms that are symptoms, but they're not a disease. It doesn't mean that you have a broken brain and you're not a broken person. And I love how you emphasize that too. It's basically a description of how you as a person are showing up. And in our world that focuses very much on, the bell curve. And if you don't fit in this bell curve way of thinking, then there's something wrong with you. It's wrong. That attitude is wrong, because we are all so uniquely different. So the approach that I take is that everyone is so completely unique. We've got to be so careful that we use something like the concept of ADHD as a description of how we are beautifully and creatively showing up in our life, and how can we take advantage of that and use it to the best of our ability. So that's kind of mind management. That's the concept of mind management, which every human needs, and we use it differently for whatever the descriptions of our life are. And it's a process. So that what I did was develop all the underlying theories and research, and I still do research, whatever, to constantly make sure that I'm up to date with the neuroscience and improving the systems I've developed. But basically what I saw from the beginning is that mind management is a skill we can teach ourselves and our children. And as parents, it's vital that we understand mind management. And I'll give some examples in a moment. But essentially, I took this whole concept and simplified it into a process that I call the neurocycle. And the neurocycle is a 5-step process that has a preparation phase before you go into it. It's a process that helps you get into your wise mind, stand back and observe how you're functioning, and then go through a process of getting that under control, basically. You can't change what's happened to you. You can't change what's going on, but you can change how you're responding, and therefore how it's going to play out into the future. So if your child, for example, is being bullied at school because they can't concentrate maybe as well as the little Johnny sitting next to them, and they're getting teased because they have to move more or have to go to the bathroom or whatever, just to create that space. Or maybe you've put them sitting on a ball instead of sitting on a chair because that gentle rocking motion stimulates the brain, and they're getting teased. So they've got to, the one hand, the movement is helping them to concentrate more, but on the other hand, now they've got to deal with the emotional side of being bullied because they're different. So there's, to teach a child how to manage all the stuff that goes with that is so important. But then as a parent, if your child is really battling and you battling and we all battling life, parenting is messy. It's so easy to get frustrated. We've got to be kind and compassionate. You talk about that, so I don't want to belabor that point, because you talk a lot about how we need to help ourselves and have kindness towards ourselves. But we've also got to be able to process what we've gone through, to be able to control our reaction. So the neurocycle can be used for helping ourselves. And I was asked a question, and I get asked this question a lot, and it was something that came up actually 4 times in interviews just in the last few days. And that was, what is the most important thing that you could tell a parent? And in relation to this messiness question, it is, if we want to help the mental health crisis, if we want to help our children, if we want to help our children who are battling with symptoms of ADHD and so on, and help ourselves, it starts with helping the parent. It's absolute priority. Your anxiety goes through to the child, no matter how much you try and hide it. That a child bases everything on looking back at the parent and saying, okay, what is wrong with me? What have I done to upset the parent? So maybe you're upset and frustrated and you react in a way that you don't want to react, and then you feel guilty, and the whole cycle sets up. We need to be able to, as a parent, create that mental space, that get that oxygen mask principle going. I've got to be able to breathe for myself. I've got to be able to know how to manage myself so that I can help my children to manage themselves. So that's a huge part of what I do in the work that I do, is helping a parent to help themselves. It's probably the first level that we need to enter this situation, is let's help the parents help themselves. Let's help the teachers help themselves. And then we can take that, and in that process, we can then simultaneously start helping the child more effectively. So that's a long answer, but essentially that's what managing messiness is.
What do you do when you're really struggling to calm down? When you're dysregulated and your brain is offline? When Medusa Mom is about to rear her ugly head and you don't want to yell at your kids again, but you also desperately need some time and space to yourself? Well, you're in luck, Mama, because I've got a free video resource waiting for you. I'm sharing my top 10 tips for what to do when you're losing your cool and you need a reset. Each of these things you can do in under a minute with no fancy prep, so that you can calm down enough to make a different choice than exploding like a volcano on everybody in the vicinity. Now, since it's a video, you can watch what I do for easier practice, and of course, there's audio plus captions to read it. I also have a little cheat sheet underneath of all the ideas, so you can grab that list, stick it in your phone somewhere, so that on the time where you're like totally freaking out, you can go to that list and quickly pick the idea that's going to help you calm down in that moment. Head over to patriciasung.com/calm, that's CALM, and download your free video on how you can keep your cool when you're overwhelmed. That's patriciasung.com/calm, because you can learn how to take care of yourself so that you can take care of your family. So a lot of moms that I work with, like, we know that we have this struggle of the mental mess and we want to help ourselves first. And in the moment, it just feels so overwhelming and your unhealthy trees are running the show. How do we pause in that moment to say, okay, I'm going to follow the 5 steps of the, like how do we get ourselves when we're that runaway train of just anger or frustration or whatever is going on, and to be able to pause and follow the instructions? How do we do that in the moment?
Okay, so brilliant question. Everything that I'm about to tell you, first of all, is scientific. Secondly, it's had years of research. Thirdly, you've heard most of it already. I'm just putting what I've done is, no, seriously. You can also, I'm not saying don't use any of the techniques that you are using, because there's some incredible techniques out there. What was missing, what I identified that was the missing kind of link, was how do we put all of this great knowledge that we instinctively know that everyone is talking about and has been talking about for really thousands of years. If you think of the philosophy and spiritual side of things as well, and how science has gone in cycles, which is normal, how can we step back for a moment and find a way of organizing our mind so that we can make our mind and brain work the way we want it to work? Because essentially, the law is that the mind works through the brain and the body, and then we show up. And what happens is that our mind is way more insightful, our wise mind, than our messy mind. It's way more insightful than our brain and our body. Our messy mind, our brain and our body are waiting for direction. And as humans, we want to train ourselves to step into the depths of our wise mind. Even a 2-year-old, there's been studies showing even 8-month-olds and 4-month-olds already can start responding. They already know how to respond emotionally and, on their level. They already have insight. They already feel connection and kindness and all these kinds of things, empathy and all these interesting things. So in the moment when something like that happens, the neurocycle is not replacing what you've done. I want to emphasize that. It's just putting it in the right order of how you can actually make that change in your brain. Because what's the most frustrating thing for people, and I saw this with my patients over the years and my own experience as a mother, is you know what to do. You can get great advice. I mean, you give great advice. There's great podcasts out there. There's great books. There's some advice that's really bad, as we know as well, which can make you feel even worse as a parent. It's like the perfect parenting, the sort of culture, what's it, the curated version, which is not real. Mm-hmm. But the thing is that, and we know this stuff, but how do we actually make it happen? Yes, I'm going to be kind to myself. Yes, I'm going to take self-care time. Yes, I'm going to do all these things. But how can I train myself to get to the point where I'm actually pushing the information through my brain in the right way to create a pattern in the network of my mind, brain, body, that I'm in that situation and I react in the correct way? Well, that takes practice. Number one, it's a skill that takes practice. Number two, it's got to be done in the right order, because to build networks in the brain via your mind and into your body that will actually help you when you need the help is not going to happen overnight. So doing it once, doing one neurocycle or listening to one great podcast, or listening to 1,000 great podcasts, is just going to give you information that you're not going to actually utilize. So the neurocycle is very much about taking all this great advice, packaging it in the right way so that you wire that into the networks as a habit. And habits don't form in 21 days. They don't form in one day. They form in cycles of 63 to 66 days. I'm just doing another massive study at the moment where we've been confirming all of these, once again, doing more insight and more depth into how long does it take to change complex behaviors. Simple behaviors you can do a little quicker. But when it comes to a complex behavior, and our parenting is extremely complex. Every child you have is extremely complex. The demands on you just being alive is extremely complex. And most of the research on like making things work has been done on very simple behaviors. So it's almost like not realistic. What we know as humans and what's been done in a lot of the science don't kind of match. So what I try to do was to cover that bridge, to build that bridge, to create a system that allows for complex behaviors to change. And how do you do it in over time? So that with that preamble, essentially, let's describe a scenario. Let's say that you've had a really busy day podcasting and you also had to run around and do a million other things, and all the technology maybe went wrong and this went wrong and whatever, and you had a call from maybe a family member and there's a big drama issue, and maybe at work something else happened, and so you frazzled, you overwhelmed, you burnt out, and this is on the top of it being summer and it's hot as crazy everywhere and the kids are bored and you just need a break. And this is a very common scenario. And so you walk in the door from this crazy day and there's toys all over the place and there's noise and the kids' friends are over and the TV's blaring and there's just mess, and it just freaks you out. I mean, this is kind of okay to allow ourselves to do this. You walk in the door, maybe yell at your kids, maybe say a few things you wish you didn't say, maybe kick the toys and break a toy. They're kind of maybe being extreme, but these kind of reactions where you say, oh, not again. I can't handle this. Can't you see what I'm doing? I'm trying to be a mother to all of you kids, and I'm trying to work, and I'm trying to podcast, and I'm trying to cook, and I'm trying to be your psychologist and your teacher and your therapist and your friend and that's so hard. So in those times, what we can do is, instead of going into, oh my gosh, I'm so bad, I'm guilt, which is what happens, that cycle of guilt. I mean, I don't know how many times as a young mother I would go to bed at night feeling so guilty for the things that I had said and done, which I know I didn't mean, which were, popped out because of the circumstances and what I was going through and all the rest of it. So long story short, you can do a neurocycle. And that starts when you know how to do the system. You're not going to learn. I'm going to give you the basic overview and walk you through a basic, simple one. But I'd strongly recommend that you actually learn the system, because there's a lot more than what I'm just explaining now, and practice it. And in the children's book, How to Help Your Children Clean Up Their Mental Mess, with all the images and simple explanations, you can actually create this as a lifestyle. And in teaching your kids, you learn yourself as well, but learn for yourself as well. I have an app called the Neurocycle app, which you as a parent can use, where I literally give you therapy and walk you through the process. We can send you those links. I have a book called Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, which is for adults. So if you put the three together, you have a toolbox. Now, considering that your mind drives everything, it should be our top priority. Managing our mind is more of a priority than managing our body, because managing your mind manages your body. But we will put more effort into, healthy nutrition. Not that I'm anti-healthy nutrition. I write books about nutrition. Your mind's going to drive the effectiveness of you eating, sticking to the nutrition plan. Also, your mind is the part of you that also drives the fact that your body's going to absorb or not absorb that nutrition. So you can have the greatest nutrition plan going for your family, but if everyone's worked up, including you, and you're trying to hide it, you're going to lose up to 96% of that nutrition, because your body can't absorb it. So even though it's that really super healthy, organic, grass-fed, whatever, you will lose the benefit of that nutrition because of the state of your mind. So with the fact that mind drives everything, mind management is a priority, an absolute priority that drives everything else. So think of mind and then everything else after. So the neurocycle helps you with that aspect of your life, with having a plan in place that helps to get the mind more organized. Now, I worked for years with 50% of my practice was people that battle with ADHD and learning disabilities, and from young to old. I also work with dementia, autism, and then obviously extreme trauma and that kind of stuff. So I'm very familiar, obviously, and from my research and so on, with these situations. So all of this that I'm saying that sounds so simple has come from years of experience of what do you do in the moment, and being a mother of four. So essentially the first thing that you want to do is prepare your brain. So in that moment when you walk in the door and you've kicked the toy and you're screaming your head off, or whatever the case, or your kids are screaming, or you're trying to get a word in edgeways, and you can feel your blood just boiling, the first thing is you have to prepare your brain, because your mind, brain, body neurophysiology is out of control. Your brain does what your messy mind is telling it to do in the moment. Your wise mind is driving the show, but your conscious, messy mind has to be literally trained to listen to the depths of our wise mind. And in those moments of high reactivity, we're not very good at doing that unless we've got networks in place And that's basically building resilience, but networks in place that will jump up and drive our functioning. And that's what I'm talking about. The neurocycle, we can pull on our resilience, which are existing networks, to help drive. So the first thing, if this is the first time you're ever doing this, the first thing you can do is get your psychoneurobiology under control by something as simple as breathing, and something as simple as the most effective. There's so many different ways of doing sort of mindfulness and meditation and breathing, but and I've got a ton of examples, but one of the tools that is so quick and so effective is breathing in for 3 counts. It's called the 10-second pause. You breathe in for 3, and then you breathe, but your whole stomach must move, like literally as you breathe in. And then when you breathe out, it's a whooshing sound. You breathe out for 7 counts. So it's in for 3 and out for 7. If you repeat that 6 to 9 times, that's 90 seconds. At 60 to 90 seconds, you would have put enough oxygen and blood flow in the front of your brain to calm down that very activated network between your frontal lobe and your amygdala, which I don't know if you've spoken about to your audience, but most people understand, have heard that somewhere.
Yes.
It calms it down, and it gets it to a state where you can actually, it's like windscreen wipers if you're driving in a rainstorm. If you don't have that kind of that level of calmness in the frontal part of your brain, which comes from increased oxygen and blood flow in that area, which can then send a message down to the amygdala, which then can send a message down to the heart, and then we can release hormones. And I can go on for hours about this, the biochemistry and neurophysiology, but basically it's like driving through a massive snowstorm with no windscreen wipers. You can't do it. Okay, so you want to just clean a bit of the snow off. So even if you only have time for 1 10-second pause, it will help. But I'd recommend a minute of that breathing. And you could be doing that as you're stepping over the toys, because you won't be talking, let's say you've yelled, but now you just go quiet and you do that breathing. You may just even want to step back out the door if you can and breathe. Close the door and then come back in again and read and do a redo. Rewind, breathe, redo. Then as you're walking through the toys, you can say to the kids, first step number 1. You're not going to say that to the kids. I'm talking to 2 frames. So the first thing you do, step number 1, is gather awareness. Gather's a very specific word. We're not just being aware, we're gathering. Very specific. So in your mind, you say 4 sentences, or you can say it out loud, depending on where you're at with this training with your kids. And I'll give you all the sort of sequence in the book. But essentially, say things like, okay, how am I feeling? I am feeling frustrated and irritated and angry and tired. What does this feel like in your body? My shoulders are tense, my whole body's in a knot, and my heart is going to beat out of my body. What are you doing? What are your behaviors? What are you saying? I'm yelling and I'm angry and my tone is irritated and I'm saying things I really do not want to say. And my whole body's like gone into this attack mode. And maybe I'm exaggerating, but I'm just giving you an example. Then the fourth thing
I don't think you are.
And the fourth thing is, what's my perspective in the moment? How am I looking at this? Oh my gosh, I can't keep doing this. I need more help, or whatever. This is crazy, whatever. Okay, so there's 4 things that you've just gathered awareness of. These are signals. They're emotional, physical, behavioral, perspective. 4 categories of signals are how we show up. In any one moment, you can categorize how you show up into those 4 signals. By slowing down after breathing, which is brain preparation, and doing this gather awareness, saying these 4 sentences, you've calmed down your psychoneurobiology even more. So your neurophysiology is going to start responding. So you feel with a bit more clarity. And what you've done is you've cleared the mist, you've cleared the snow with the windscreen wipers, and now you can start tuning in consciously and deliberately to the wisdom of your wise mind, which is the core of who you are. We even talk about being wired for love in neuroscience. There isn't a structure in your brain or body that isn't geared towards your survival. So anything that threatens survival, your mind, brain, and body are always working towards your survival. So your non-conscious mind, which is the biggest part of you, which is super intelligent, operates 24/7, where all your experiences are stored, is on your side. And when we tune into that level, we can then start getting a level of calmness and wisdom. And you can see this in your kids too, because I'm sure you've experienced where you go to your kids and you say, I'm so upset. And they say, oh, mommy, what happened? And they start giving you advice. And you think, my goodness, why didn't I think of that? So even our kids have got the most incredible ability to tune in when they know how to get through the maze. So you've gathered awareness. It's put you in this very insightful phase. You can then follow that by answering those 4 signals. It's called focused reflection. So now you focus and reflect. Okay, why do I feel frustrated, angry, irritated? Well, all the list, this, and you can answer. Why am I feeling that in my body? Well, it goes into my body. I'm feeling that, and it's consistent. I seem to feel this reaction when I'm feeling this. You start building a link between the emotions and the physical. Why am I saying this? Well, this is just I'm reacting like this because I've got so much energy inside of me and it's coming out in things that I don't want to say. And then my perspective, it feels like this is always happening. Why does it feel like this is always happening? When, where, why, what, how? Can I have a few questions on how often, what is the pattern, that kind of stuff. So you're just gathering, you're not solving, you're just getting the information. The third thing is then to write this down. Now, in the ideal situation, you can go and sit in your little room and you can pull out your diary and you could, but listen, let's be real. That doesn't happen when you're a mother. So what I recommend is that you create a space in your environment. And what my sister-in-law did, which I always use as an example, is she took one of the walls in her kitchen. And I mean, if this is possible or not, you can adapt this down. I'll give you 2 adaptations. But you paint it with that chalk paint, that blackboard or whiteboard paint. Have a thing of chalk and have a little toy box or something there, or a nice little basket with paper, crayons, pens. If you decide to get the brainy toy that comes with a book, whatever, have other toys. Have a dedicated area that is for mind management. Like we go to the bathroom to clean our teeth in the basin or in a sink, whatever you call it, in the basin in South African language. You go to the gym to do a workout. You go to play ball outside. You don't throw it around in the house. That concept of dedicating a space is very, very, very helpful. So you go to that space. So use the mom. You've done your breathing and you've gathered awareness as you're walking through, but you go sit at that space and literally demonstrate a model for the child. Maybe there's a nice bench there. Maybe there's a little, whatever, a little cute chair or something. You go sit yourself down there and you actually say, okay, guys, I'm sorry I yelled. This is what happened. And you actually repeat back to them what you gathered and, the 4 signals. I feel frustrated and angry. Simply, obviously age appropriate. And, if you'll dumb it down, not dumb it down, you'll make it more simple, more complex, depending on the age. But you're telling them how you're feeling. So you've done a little gather awareness, you've done a little reflect, and before you write, just go and sit down and repeat that for the kids. Say, I felt like this and this and this, a simple version. And then why, just the focus reflection, just very quickly, because I've had a hard day. And then you start writing on the board. Maybe draw a picture of a face that looks angry, or write the word, depending on if they're literate. Even if they're not literate, you could draw a face on the board, that on the white blackboard or on a piece of paper that says, I am frustrated. And maybe it's the smiley face, but the mouth is that way around, the upside down. And next to you write frustrated. And you just put down the words. Doesn't even have to be fancy. You just put them all over, pictures, words. And then maybe the kids start drawing with you, but you are writing it down. When you do that, you are actually helping your conscious mind to connect with through the subconscious, which is a portal or a doorway into the unconscious. You're drawing on your wisdom. And all these very sequential steps, if you skip a step out, it doesn't have the same effect. All this is driving neuroplasticity in your brain. You're driving a network. You're pulling up that toxic reaction that maybe has been a persistent pattern, because this is being a parent, you've been a parent for a while. So there's these patterns, or these parent from your own parenting, being parented. There's stuff in us that is activated and triggered, as we all know. And so that starts coming up and that starts guiding us. Then step number 4 is to say, okay, now this is what's happened. Now I need to do something about it. I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have said that. Now you know why I said those things. I should rather have said this, but this is why I said it. So you're actually walking them back through those 3 steps. You're kind of doing a recycle through the 3 steps. And that's step 4. So step 4 is the recheck, where you are looking at what you've written and you're talking about what you gathered awareness of and what you reflected on and why. And so now, because you've got insight now, so you're looking to reevaluate, to reconceptualize, this has happened. What can I do? And that's when you'll be so amazed. And I can tell this now from experience as a parent, as a therapist, clinician, and neuroscientist, that you will come up with solutions as you in the recheck phase. And if you don't, your kids will. And it may not be the big, well, not going to solve it all in one day, but for today, what can you do today to solve it? This has happened. What can I do today? And maybe the kids say, oh, Mom, I'm so sorry. We can make sure that our toys aren't at the front door when you walk in. We can try and help tidy up a little bit more. We can help you with this, or you can, whatever, you can start reconceptualizing, Mom, you need to watch TV with us more, or whatever. It's just, or whatever according to, but you work through collaboratively, deep, meaningful connection, creating a safe space, and you've modeled for the child that I'm looking after myself so I can look after you. But you've given the child the message, hey, Mom also battles, Dad also battles, but there's a way I can walk through these processes. And then you end it off with an active reach, a little action. Okay, this is fun. I feel so much better. Thanks for talking to me. Let's make dinner together, or let's go for a walk with our new puppy. So you do something that kind of ends the scenario and helps you move forward. And it might just be, from the recheck, it might be, oh yeah, I need to make a plan to not do so much. Yes, mommy, you're doing way too much. You need to do less. Let's work out when you can play with us more, when you can have time to watch your favorite TV show, or whatever it may be. And that's that it's now being done collaboratively, and it's like written down, and it's, you could then have a little journal that you could each have your own journal. You date the journal, and you just like make a little summary in that journal of what the discussion was, and you put that in there. I mean, this sounds like it'll take long, and at first it will take long because you're learning the system. But once you have the system in place, you can put anything in there. Like, for example, at step 5, which is the active reach, that's a great place to use CBT techniques, like visualization, whatever. If you use a CBT technique before you've even done these 5 steps, it won't work. It's a band-aid on the wound. So any technique without actually processing and empowering a person to understand why I feel like this, or why I'm showing up like this, is not going to have a long-term change. And it's going to be a persistent pattern that keeps coming back, and it's going to add to the feelings of, oh gosh, my ADHD's got worse, or something like that. We had kids that were so constrained, and over the years I've had in clinical practice and in schools and places where I've worked, that were so constrained by their diagnosis that they didn't ever feel that they'd be able to learn, that ended up becoming top students academically, and running businesses and that kind of thing. And I've seen it too often. I've seen it through the research, and also obviously you've got to look at scientific research as well as just clinical experience, but it's other clinicians as well. So that is a big picture. What I would recommend people do is, if you're interested to get into this, what I have basically described is a simple process that makes sure that you make the brain, and I'm holding up a brain for those of you that are just listening. I'm holding up a brain. It's not a real one, in a sculpture model of the brain. I'm holding up a little green plant that shows a healthy thought. So just think of green trees outside, and I'm holding up a wiry looking toxic tree. The trees represent our experiences or our thoughts. Thoughts are experiences, and thoughts are made of memories. So every experience, like that experience you've had at school, or whatever went on in your day to make you walk in the door like that, would have been a bunch of memories that formed into a tree, with the thing that actually happened being the roots, how you processed it, and then the branches are the interpretation and how it shows. And then that combination is how it shows up. How does things show up? Through your 4 signals. What are the 4 signals? Your emotions, your behaviors, your bodily sensations, and your perceptions. So what I've done in the book and in my app is I teach you this slowly, take you through it day by day, little mini lessons in the app. In the book, I teach you exactly how to help your child understand what a thought is, that you have happy trees and sad trees, and whatever. And like, happy trees are like you have a great conversation, or you learn something at school that you love, so most of the time we've got happy trees. Good things for everything forms into these tree networks, and they guide us. But sometimes we have the bad ones, and the bad ones can then make us act in certain ways. And that doesn't mean that we have to stay stuck like that. But so if a child showing up with behavioral problems that make them seem like they are naughty and need more discipline, sure, I'm not saying allow bad behavior. What I am saying is that see that behavior as one of 4 signals telling you something. So yes, you don't want them to be hitting their sibling, or biting someone, or throwing toys out, around, or speaking in an ugly way. Obviously, we want to shape that behavior, help them to understand the impact of that behavior. But you can go and do that in your mind management corner, like I've described. So there's this thing, how we show up as a mom or a dad or as a child. We can allow ourselves to feel that, recognize that's not who we are, and then go into that little part of our home and kind of work it out there. Now, realistically, you're not always going to be at home. You're going to be in the car. You're going to be at the shops. You're going to be on the beach. You're going to be walking in the park. You're going to be at a friend's house. It's when they love to do the things that you don't want them to do, kids. Everywhere that you can, once you've got the system in place, you can remind your child, let's do a neurocycle, let's calm down, and once they understand how to do it, which honestly, these kids learn quicker than adults. I can tell you that now. They learn, if you follow the sequence of the book, they then learn what to put into each of those steps. Once you understand the basic principles and you go through all 5 steps, you know how to do brain preparation. It's easy to work out nice little systems that you can put into those 5 steps. So it can be applied and adapted to everything. Last thing I want to say about that is on the learning side, one of the things as we all know, when you've got symptoms of ADHD, is it's hard to concentrate and learn and build knowledge. A lot of my cutting edge research that I started with was to help children how to learn when they were battling at school with ADHD symptoms. And so the neurocycle was initially developed for people with traumatic brain injuries who battled academically as well as with the emotional side. But I first started with the academic side, the how to learn. So the neurocycle teaches you how to get information from the textbook or from the teacher and the notes, whatever, into your brain and then out again. So it's that cycle. So it's also excellent for helping with that. So it's basically how you get information in your brain and build your brain, that you can use it. And then also when you are showing up with our signals that are disruptive, how can we say, okay, that's not who I am, because we want to keep our identity intact. I have a whole chapter in that book on like labels and identity and all that kind of stuff, and trauma and all that social interaction, all that. So there's a lot of information in the book to make it simple and healthy. But we want to teach our children, okay, if I'm backing to learn, here are the steps to build it into my brain so that I can make this knowledge useful. If I'm feeling very angry and sad, that energy is pent up, they don't know how to express it. I have a way I can, as a 2-year-old, I can go pick up Brainy, point of contact. I can point you pictures in the book. I can make Brainy do things. So you could, like if you've got a young child, for example, and you see your child, you pick a child up from day camp and they are very upset and they won't talk to you and they're just sitting in the back seat and they're kicking the chair or they're throwing a tantrum or something, or they're refusing to eat or they're just refusing to communicate. If you have Brainy in the car, for example, the idea is to just say, oh, I see Brainy's very upset today. Brainy doesn't want to eat. Brainy's kicking the chair. Brainy's really sad. What's wrong with Brainy? And we all know that for a young child, when you allow them to do that sort of transference onto something else, that's their way. It's play therapy, basically, how they can then communicate. So it's having a designated character like Brainy, a designated space and a designated system within which you fit all the great knowledge that you already have gained as parents from the great information that's out there. But I'm giving you a system that actually will help you wire it into your brain to make long-term changes that are effective and useful to help you and your child. Long answer. I hope that made sense.
Yes, no, I think I could ask 37 more questions to follow up. I think the most important things for us to know is that our brain is not static. It's not stuck that way. There is clearly decades of research that tells us that we can change our brain, we can change the way it functions, we can change the way we wire, we can change our habits. And it's really comforting as a mom to know that even though you have those days where you are so mad at yourself, at the end of the night, you're just kicking yourself on all the things that you could have done differently, is that you don't have to stay there. That's not the place that you are sentenced to for the rest of your life, that there is hope and there are systems out there and ways that you can learn that fit the way that our brains like to absorb information, and you can make changes and react in different ways, and that there is hope. There's light out there. It doesn't have to stick.
There's so much hope. Your brain is always changing. And the key is that you can direct the change and you can teach a child how to direct the change. And what's so interesting, and this is, I think, related to this, which is adding to this level of hope, because I know how hopeless some of my patients felt. I know how some of the moms who are listening to you feel. I know you've experienced it yourself, and I know being a mom of 4, you can feel so hopeless at some stages. So this research has inspired me as a parent. And what I want to share with you, there's a series of studies, and some of them were quite recent, that have been used a lot in the ADHD language. Now, I'm not saying ADHD doesn't exist. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that it's not a disease. By the way, according to the science, it's a cluster of symptoms that are part of, and they would be, if you think of the 4 signals, emotions, behaviors, perspectives, and bodily sensation, it's under the behaviors. And then it obviously, those 4 always go together. So you're going to have the others going along with it. So essentially, the research you may have heard of the research, you may even have spoken about the research, you may even have had people on your show who have spoken or referenced research that was done in 2012 specifically, and then there was another study done in 2017, I think it was, and they said that brains of ADHD children and adults look different to people that don't have ADHD. That research has been completely shown to be inaccurate. When they reanalyzed that research and they looked at the statistics, it was incorrectly presented, but it's the most quoted research out there. The research around that shows that when you tell someone your brain is different, you're really backing out to be told my brain is different, and the importance of the brain. Where's the hope? You can remove hope from the child and you can remove hope from the parent. And then it's almost like, okay, well, I've just got to live with this terrible thing, and now there's something wrong with me as an individual. Hear this. That science was not accurately presented. And it's very upsetting that it was to so many parents, but most parents don't, and most people in this world don't realize that research was inaccurately presented, and that there actually was no difference. Hear this, no difference in the brain of an person with ADHD and a person who's so-called normal. That this whole thing that a person is born genetically broken with, and that's why they have ADHD, is not the correct messaging. We actually don't know why people battle with those symptoms. There could be so many reasons. So for us to say definitively, well, I don't say it, but for this, the science doesn't back that up. Right. And that's where the hope comes. It exists. There's definitely a cluster of symptoms that definitely manifest And in our way that our world is structured, they don't serve us very well. We have to learn to adapt. There's no two ways about it. But I wanted to just share that with you, that there's hope, and there's hope as well. That means that my brain can change. I can direct it in the direction I want it. And that means your child as well. And then you can make those so-called negative symptoms into positive symptoms and make that energy that they generate work for you, because energy is never lost. It's just transferred. So, it's like this concept of depression is not bad. It's actually good for you. It's when it tips to, when we don't manage it and it tips and becomes debilitating. Same things with those symptoms. Those symptoms, so-called symptoms of ADHD, they're not bad. A lot of those they've been pathologized. But if they're not managed and directed and used correctly, they can tip. And that's, what you've all experienced. So if you can keep them managed, and that's what I found, using the neurocycle for learning was a powerful tool to help to direct that energy of the concentration and, and getting yourself organized. It was a phenomenal way. So if you use a parallel kind of approach of using the neurocycle for learning, I have a whole book called Think, Learn, Succeed on that. And we've got a whole program being built into the app as well on how to use it for learning. I talk about it a little bit in the book as well. Then you parallel that with the neurocycle for managing mental health issues. You've got a two-pronged approach to help to manage things that can be very overwhelming. Make them work for you instead of against you.
Okay, on that note, I've got my lightning round questions. But before I ask those, where's the best place for moms to follow you, find you? Obviously, you have the book coming out around when this podcast is airing. Tell us how the moms listening can get more of this.
My social media handle is Dr. Caroline Leaf, and my webpage is Dr. Leaf, and I have a podcast called Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. There's tons of stuff for parents, kids on both. I give my work is geared towards adults and children. So parents, some people aren't parents as well, as we know. So that's the best place. And the book's available wherever books are sold. And I have lots of books. But the latest that's coming out that we've been talking about is how to help your child clean up their mental mess.
Okay. So here's the lightning round. You don't have to explain anything. You just fill in the blank. So number 1, the best thing that I've read or listened to recently is?
Yeah, I read so much. I'm very biased towards brain research. So the research papers around what's happening in the field of psychoneurobiology is very exciting for me. And the fact that there's been such a shift in the world of neuroscience and communication pathology and psychoneurobiology in the field of learning issues is hugely important. So I know that sounds so boring, but for me,
no, I mean, I think if someone's listening to my podcast, they probably love brains. So
good.
That's science. Okay, number 2, my most boring about me fact is?
What is the most boring fact? I love watching things like Downton Abbey. Said boring.
Okay, number 3, when I'm having a rough day, my go-to quote, song, poem, book, podcast, activity, whatever is?
I'll actually take my dogs for a walk on the beach, or I'll start doing some work. I write science papers too. So I find that I get lost in that. So if I'm really worked up, I'll go and get lost in my research. So it's dogs, and my husband will go for a walk. So it's time for a walk now. Let's go for a walk.
Okay, number 4, don't tell anyone I
love so much coffee. I drink coffee all the time. It's in my blood.
Number 5, if I had a magic fairy wand for one spell, I would really help people to understand the fact that your mind can be changed, your mind can be managed. You can't change the events and circumstances of life, but you can learn how to change your reactions and responses. And last one, number 6, my best piece of advice for mamas with ADHD is?
Work on yourself and give yourself a lot of compassion and kindness. Start with yourself. Oxygen mask principle.
Thank you so much for being here. I wish I had another 4 hours to pick your brain, because I absolutely love what you're doing in the field and giving us hope that we can be different. We can do things differently and find a way to be happy, even given the crazy mess of circumstances that comes along. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you. I enjoyed it so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
For more resources, classes, and community, head over to my website, motherhoodinadhd.com.